I'm looking at the examples that you've given so far are around deep vertical integration, and I think the example of PhD really shows that when you put it into your global planning system. Do you have any epic wins to date from a PhD case study that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, there's one example which has emerged out of Melbourne, which is a client, and it's I probably can't mention specifically, but what's emerged out of that and what's emerged out of a specific collaboration within Source is a big idea where rather than just communicating an ad campaign with something, a client is committed to lending a significant and big sum to a certain community. So a big idea has emerged from that, and that whole thing cascaded through an idea which came from a suggestion, which then got collaborated and cascaded through the system. So there are definitely tangible examples and cases of that are starting to come through.
With more and more brands producing video content for the digital space, and in some cases they have subtle brand placements within the content, and in other cases it's not so subtle. What would be the best practice for a brand within gamification? Do brands have a place within the features and functionality of the game, or would you recommend the brand being more passive and just a platform for engagement? And my second part of this question is, if that's the case, what is the best, I guess, distribution model to get users engaged with these games?
So if we're talking about brands in games and using the game as the mechanism to engage people, which is very valid, where we see that work the best is when it makes specific and relevant sense for the brand to be at that point. So an example would be, we're currently working on a project for a fast food chain where we are creating a management simulation game that is branded for them. So it makes sense because the management game is about their very product, their very business. So if you didn't put their brand in, it would look really odd. And in fact, their brand adds to it, and because it's more credible to have a high street name in a restaurant management game than it is to have a made-up gamey one. And so, in fact, that's where the brand brings something to it. So when it's well designed and it's well positioned, absolutely right. The counter for that, though, is that most of these are long play engagements. People engage for a long time. And the ad industry traditionally is an interrupt model. It's a model where we go, I've got 30 seconds, I need to shout at people and get my message across. And you don't have to do that. You can be much more subtle and smarter about how you integrate. And that's equally true for gamification. I think that part of the reason I like Nike so much is they haven't gamified buying shoes, they've gamified running. They've looked at the behaviour that they want people to carry out. Sure, it benefits their business. People run more, their shoes wear out more, great. But that's what they've focused on, and that's why it's engaged so well, because they've really focused on the behaviour that the customer wants and the behaviour that the customer participates in.
So Marigo, I mean, this is something that you're heavily involved in, and you work with brands to make this happen. When people leave this room and they go, right, gamification is something that I want to use and adopt and do, and Friday morning, and when we return back to our constituencies, what are those practical first steps that we can take, or that anyone can take in starting to apply gamification and do gamification beyond just the theory of it?
Yeah, I think it's really important to first map out what is it, what kind of relationship do you want with your customer? So, I mean, and behind that is what kind of actions do you want from your customers? And that is really understanding what are their motivations, what is it that they want to get from your brand. So it's almost starting from scratch and being playful with that as well. Because a lot of the time we think we know, but more often than not that we don't. So I think understanding the behaviours that we want and then looking at what alternative ways we can engage with them by being more playful and more creative with both game and digital media.
So the thing I would say, Friday morning, the couple of bits of advice I would probably give, and I'm going to sound biased with one of them, I'm really not, but the first one is try and pick something that's big enough to get meaningful outcomes, but not so big that you're trying to gamify your whole operation. I mean, I think what PH's done is incredible, frankly. It's really ambitious, and I'm sure the learnings that they've gone through have been extraordinary. But try to pick something that will have real impact, that's big enough to identify what could work without going completely crazy. And then the next thing is don't, in the nicest possible way, don't try and do it yourself. We've probably, over the last 10 years,
So
we've
don't
built...
try gamification at home.
Yeah, kind of. We've built over 300 games over the last 3 years, and I would still say we do not get it right every time. The game design is not an exact science, and what works is a process, but you will get much better outcomes if you're benefiting from learnings. So love to work with all of you, but I know that's not realistic, but work with somebody who's done some of this stuff before. That's definitely so worth it.
Yeah, and just sort of manage your expectations as well, because gamification is no guarantee to success. Like on average, from Playnomics? They found that with the 87% of players do not play beyond level 1 in a game. So
87%.
87%. And then those that get beyond level 1 or level 2, you're going to lose 95% of them before the year ends. So, I mean, designing a great gamification strategy, which is why you need your professionals, is basically because it's no guarantee of success. I mean, a great gamification strategy is just as hard as a best-selling novel, a chart-topping album. It's a work of creative art. It requires a lot of iteration and a lot of careful thought and planning in it. It's not just adding a bit of fun and bells and whistles. It's quite a deeply strategic and creative act.
That being said, it is accessible. You can do it.
Yeah.
You can do it now.
Hiya, thanks for the few examples that you've given us. It appears that the examples that you used today rely on an existing behaviour. So for the people in the room who might think about starting to try and gamify either their business or their brands, what are the existing or what are the most exercised behaviours or tactics in games that, if there was a top 5, these are the type of things people like to do that are the shortcuts to try and gamifying?
We would say that we have a toolbox of methodologies that we would use when we design a game. And they're everything from awarding points, leveling systems, missions, quests or objectives, using leaderboards, social media integration. The technology choice is very important, so whether it's on mobile or sits in Facebook and so forth. And it's really about taking all of those, and others as well, and looking at which ones are appropriate to achieve the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And it may just be that progress bar that you end up using because that's appropriate for the behaviour that you want to motivate and drive, or it may be they're all relevant. So it's very hard to be specific, which is why I say, people talk about the fact that people hear about gamification, they go, oh, let's give everyone points, and that's kind of pointification, and it doesn't go any further than that, and then it doesn't work. And really that's why I would say that you work with somebody who's done this before and has had some interesting outcomes, because every situation is different, and there's lots that we can learn from experiences, but it does need to be crafted.
One was just going back to the crime in the community, if there's a way that you could enable the wider community to help solve crimes through gamification. And a second part to that is also how it could potentially impact people's engagement with television through a multi-platform engagement with gamification.
Second one is really easy. It's already happening. And in fact, television is just a perfect environment within individual programs and even across channels. So it's already happening, and really happy to talk outside of this about tons of examples. I think it could work for crime as well. It's just not a 30-minute creative solution, but I think it would be a really interesting one to look at. Yeah. Fascinating. Love to
and I think we can actually learn from what's happening in the Middle East, the Arab Spring. There's the use of mobile technology and SMS and using sort of Twitter. There's people are galvanising action and support and help just by using social media. So I think adding a game layer to that would probably just sort of make it a little bit more fluid.
Quick question on the, you mentioned a couple of times leaderboards, etc. So for PhD, but also for the umbrella game. Yeah. Do you think that leaderboards actually add to the motivation or can backfire and become a demotivation for people to start playing?
Maybe you go in 8 seconds.
In 8 seconds, leaderboards are always skewed. You're always going to get a type of player that loves to get the points and the recognition and all leaderboards look like that. So I think you need to be very creative with what additional things that you add to that. You can have a variety of different leaderboards for different types of players is usually the best way to go. Any massive multiplayer game has multiple leaderboards for different types of actions and activities.
The other thing I would add to that, so definitely multiple leaderboards. Your ambition is that everybody appears on at least one. And given the rise of the social game over the last 5 years, rise and fall some might say, but one of the real lessons that came out of Facebook games was how important it is for people to compete with their friends. And so that's the one leaderboard you should definitely have, is because people really care about how they're doing against their friends, much more than, you know, coming 4,827th on a global all-time leaderboard.
Would gamification provide better learning outcomes for marketing and comms graduates?
So gamification often and is used extensively in learning, full stop. So absolutely you could help them just learn. And it can be used in two ways, specifically to learn individual pieces of knowledge or skill, but also to track learning and progression of learning and development over time as well. So in both of those areas, absolutely.
And also you can turn the whole sort of onboarding into a game. Yeah. So it's like, you know, rather than sort of sit through endless talks and lectures with different divisions, you actually go into a quest and discovery of those things. So you're actually making that whole learning process a whole game within the building or the company.
Absolutely.